In the previous episode, we witnessed Frank Lloyd Wright navigating through tumultuous times, facing personal challenges and leaving an indelible mark on architecture. Join us in the next chapter as we delve deeper into Wright's later years, unveiling his iconic masterpieces and the evolution of his visionary ideas. Continuing with the Usonian houses, this was the first one he drew for Dakota that was never built. And this is the Jacobs house that he did build, as you can see, very modest homes. Made, let's say, with little surface, the dining room disappeared. The dining room introduced in the form of a niche. In other words, he introduced many things that we now see as completely commonplace, that we recognize as if they had always been there, and Frank Lloyd Wright invented them in the Usonian houses. When we see them in this prefabricated and elemental construction, and those interiors, so laconic and concise, still today they move us because it was his great contribution to how houses could be made when there is little money in the stage of the Depression. So, this Wright, the Wright of Falling Water, the Wright of the Falling Water, the Wright of Johnson Wax Laboratories, and the Wright of the Usonian houses, became an important figure once again, returning to the forefront. He had many other ideas like the Clover Lift, houses that he tried to group together. He continued tirelessly producing houses, but this architect had enough recognition because many Usonian houses were built, enough to open a new Taliesin, this time in the desert in Arizona. So he spent summers in Wisconsin and winters. He crossed the country and went to Arizona, where he built this Taliesin West. As he called it, he had Taliesin North, and this was Taliesin West in the American West. This one, which he used to say that eventually the desert would recover it, well, indeed, in the middle of the desert he built this Taliesin, where he and the members around him, more like members of a sect devoted to Wright than employees or students, would move with him. The whole tribe, so to speak, would relocate from Wisconsin to Arizona for the winter, and naturally, there were work areas. Both the areas of what was already a project-producing factory and the residential areas of the master. Wright and his disciples, where there was a harp, a grand piano. He even, when he had property in the desert and had to make himself, you will see it, do not comment on it. I should have done it the first time he went to this desert. He made a construction of canvas and wood that was the most, provisional. And yet, the grand piano could not be missing. And inside this small camp that you see, there is a grand piano as there would be in all his houses, up to the last one, which he would call the Taliesin East. When he built the Guggenheim, Mr. Guggenheim was very rich. He permanently paid him a suite at the plaza, gigantic, with his grand piano, where he spent a good part of his time, and he came to call it the Taliesin East. Now he had 3 Taliesins, the one in the north in Wisconsin, the one in the south, the one in the west, the one in the desert, and finally the room at the plaza. All these phenomena made Wright so popular that he made it to the cover of Time magazine, which is the ultimate consecration in America. Here, he was photographed at the Taliesin in Wisconsin, portraying him as the wise man who had managed to defeat his enemies. Surrounded by his students, with Olgi Vanna in Taliesin North, and with collaborators in Taliesin West in the desert, Wright had managed to rise from his ashes, and in 1940, 2 years after that Time magazine cover, the MoMA had no choice but to dedicate a monographic exhibition to him. Significantly, it was held in parallel with an exhibition of Griffith, the filmmaker who made The Birth of a Nation, understanding that Griffith, like Frank Lloyd Wright, had been builders of American identity. Of course, the war years were spent in dedicated work, with World War II interrupting construction efforts. He focused on his students and contemplated ideas, but he barely built anything. However, after the war ended, He was able to build a tower for those who had commissioned the Johnson Building. This tower, which you see here and was previously introduced, is a unique tower. Shaped like a tree with a sort of trunk, which is like the trunk from which the different floors protrude with the use of laboratories, and which you can see here in this vintage image, relating the floors that are set back more to give this kind of double heights, which provide it with spatial richness to what is essentially a tree embedded in the landscape. His first skyscraper, he had dreamed of making many. Already in the Columbian exhibition, he proposed to make a half-mile-high skyscraper to house all the services of the municipality of Chicago. It was not successful, and this was the first one he managed to make. But he was not satisfied with just one, and shortly after, he managed to persuade a client who came to ask him to make a 3-story office building to make him this tower. So why not? 3 floors. But if the ground, the man said, is worth nothing, he says no, but you have to show the importance of your business, and he made him this tower, the Price Tower in Oklahoma, in a place where there is absolutely nothing. And the one that suddenly rises like a needle, that tower, that has been so influential later with that characteristic turbine distribution, and that, well, we have no choice but to mention among the most unique and exciting works of Frank Lloyd Wright. The craziest, undoubtedly, was this. In 1956, a year before he died, when he said he hadn't managed to do anything more than small skyscrapers and proposed, very seriously, the construction of a mile-high skyscraper. The last skyscraper that broke the world record is only half as tall. He proposed the Mile-hight, Illinois, a mile-high Illinois. He painted a canvas 8 meters high, which he exhibited in a hotel lobby, trying to persuade those who wanted a skyscraper. Chicago, which had been the birthplace of skyscrapers, couldn't settle for making little towers, nothing, just a tiny thing. A mile high, if we think about the half-mile towers he proposed in 1993, which have only now been built and took more than a century to materialize. Well, maybe this one, proposed in the year 2060, if the same cycle continues, will get built. Quite beautiful because, again, he compares it not only with the one you just made, which is nothing, or the pyramids of Egypt, the Eiffel Tower, and even the Empire State Building, saying, this is nothing. We can do bigger things, if we set our minds to it, because Chicago has the dream and the drive to do something of that kind. Very nice that the exhibition he held in the hotel lobby to showcase his project was dedicated to 10 figures, architects, engineers, inventors. There was Otis, of course, his master Sullivan, Mayert, Nervi, and a Spaniard, Torroja. Torroja was one of the 10 to whom he dedicated the Mile-High project. And we reach the end, the culmination, the Guggenheim building that he created for Hilla Rebay and Solomon Guggenheim, the one you see here with the model. Solomon Guggenheim, a great financier, was willing to fund the artistic adventures of Hilla, an intelligent woman well connected with the European avant-garde, an art collector. She wanted to create what she called a museum of non-objective art, having already made another. This was her grand project. Unfortunately, she didn't live to see the project completed. Solomon Guggenheim, who was quite old, passed away at the age of 82, a decade before the museum was finished. Curiously, Frank Lloyd Wright also didn't live to see it. He died just a few months before the project's inauguration. However, what's interesting about the matter is that, to begin with, he attempted to do the same thing he had proposed to the other gentleman in the desert, Gordon Strong. They had to drive their cars towards him. He proposed making a Guggenheim, as you can see here, in the shape of a ziggurat. And then suddenly he had, as sometimes happens, that brilliant idea. He said, "No, ziggurat, you have to write it backward." Instead of ziggurat, he wrote Tagorids. He drew the mythical sketch of the Guggenheim, a ziggurat that advances but in the opposite direction. with which it would end up being built across from Central Park, right in the heart of Manhattan, in that city he despised because he loved, that suburban utopia of America. And becoming, here you see him chatting affectionately with the workers, transforming into an icon of America and a symbol of New York. For a man who detested New York, even though he had his Taliesin East at the Plaza Hotel. Ultimately, Frank Lloyd Wright cannot be encapsulated in just 1 hour of conversation or 100 images. He was a cosmos, an excessive man. Walt Whitman, the great American poet, said in Song of Myself, "I celebrate myself." Frank Lloyd Wright did nothing less. He celebrated himself. This last building, the Guggenheim, was indeed a tribute to Solomon Guggenheim, the financier, and his wife, Hilaribe, an art collector. However, above all, it was a celebration of himself. He always believed, much like Whitman, that he could reconcile his romantic individualism with the collective spirit of a nation through communion with nature. In his view, each blade of grass represented and was part of a larger whole. Whitman could write, "A leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars," and in a similar vein, Frank Lloyd Wright's long journey came to an end half a century ago. It is true that his anti-urban utopia has faded and turned into a nightmare, but the integrity of his architectural vision continues to inspire us all. And thus, we conclude our journey through the life and work of Frank Lloyd Wright, an architect who defied conventions, transformed architecture, and left a lasting legacy. From his early experiences to the iconic Falling Water and the innovative Guggenheim Museum, each chapter of his career was an expression of creativity and rebellion. Through his personal triumphs and challenges, Wright reminded us that architecture is more than structures. It is a narrative that reflects our deepest aspirations and desires. His utopian vision and relentless pursuit of beauty left an indelible mark on the history of design. We hope you've enjoyed joining us on this fascinating journey through the brilliant mind of Frank Lloyd Wright. If you liked this content, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications. See you in future architectural explorations. Goodbye.